3, 2, 1, don't blow up. Eight going on 9 years is long in the tooth by tech standards. My main PC is rock solid under load, but has a chance to hang while leaving sleep mode of all things. Throw in fun stuff like boot loops now and then as seen here, and I can't help but get nervous. While a simple CMOS clear knocks it out of a boot loop until the next time, and a fresh Windows install might resolve the sleep mode woes, there's no simple fix for the bigger problem. I'm asking 2020's performance out of hardware from 2015. At the time, an i7-6700K was pretty good. More cores in the form of an X-series chip came at a price that would have eaten way too much of my budget for CPU alone, and that's not including a motherboard to support it. Meanwhile, AMD's Zen hadn't released yet. Team Red's available products could hit similar performance to the 6700K at cost of more than double the power consumption. Brute forcing boost clocks almost 1 GHz faster for equivalent throughput did not strike me as very practical. Thus, Groot was born, quiet and incongruous in an age of glass side panels and RGB eye candy. Heavy on CPU and lighter on GPU to match the expected workload, it's been reliable overall after some early teething problems in the form of the CPU giving up with zero warning a few months in. It had a hang while web browsing, and it never posted again. RMA'd it, and the new one worked flawlessly ever since. Guessing the first had a defect that slipped through quality control only to fail later on. After that was smooth sailing until the CPU cooler and power supply both went out from age within the past couple years. I expected the cooler to degrade while I'd hoped for more life out of the PSU before it gave me grief. In hindsight, I should have upped the capacity at the time when I replaced it. A 550 watt is enough for my needs, but only just. A planned GPU upgrade never quite worked out until the past fall, between budget fluctuations, the whole world trying to end the past few years, and that sort of stuff. Seriously, GPU scalpers. On the flip side, maybe better I waited. A 4060 Ti mops the floor with the old 960. But meta, you ask, why didn't you get a top-of-the-line 40 series card? Yeah, I get it. I'm a pleb who casually games at 1080p. Give me solid frame rate at modest settings and I'm happy. My video projects don't use much GPU rendering either, so I don't need the muscle of a high-end card. 40 series brings high efficiency and the newest gen hardware encoders, exactly what I was looking for. Around that time, the video projects did start to choke on 16 gigs of RAM, so gave them room to breathe with 64 gigs. Enhanced Groot would have served me very well for a while longer if the scale creep hadn't marched onward. The rig's core remained original and held it back as I got more ambitious. In 2015, 4K was more the realm of pros and serious hobbyists. Now I'm working with it more often and in larger quantities, especially when I film at events. A quick run through Cinebench shows somewhat decent single-core scores, but a low core count lets the i7 down in multi-core loads, and that's with some overclocking applied. 4060 Ti meanwhile pulls its weight by virtue of being a recent GPU. It's clearly time for a refresh. Made preparations off camera before I put Groot under for surgery. Apparently there wasn't an easy way to extract my product key without a third-party app. Reluctantly linked a Microsoft account to let me activate on the new hardware later on. Also made sure I had my USB installation drives handy, though I did have access to other computers to make a new one if I needed to. This time I'm going with an AMD platform. Threadrippers unfortunately way out of my budget, as crazy as it would be to build around one of those monsters. Ryzen 7000 series still commands high prices and would require a jump to DDR5. The 5000 series offers plenty of punch. Future me pointing out that this project began in early 2024 and that's when all of the part selection and purchasing happened. I'm not claiming to have a perfect solution, just one that works for me. I'm just a silly guy doing my silly little projects and making videos about them. It's ironic how these completely unrelated delays conspired to have this video drop around the time that Zen 5 is going to release. Wouldn't really affect my purchasing decisions, but will be interesting to see what that does to the pricing in the next few months. In a nutshell, yes, this project is using hardware that's now, well, 2 generations old effectively, and yeah, AM4 is reaching end of life, but it's a huge jump up from the existing hardware that I'm taking out, and I got it all for much below MSRP, so that's a win-win in my books. I do keep my equipment around for a while if you haven't already noticed, so any future upgrades there will be videos about. Alright, back to the main video. Got a great deal on this Asus X570 board along with the Ryzen 9 5950X. Flashier than what I'd normally go for, but certain features come at a premium these days, though they really should not. Debug display was a must after my numerous frustrations with stripped down error LEDs. Overbuilt VRMs may be called a gimmick, or perhaps not if system routinely gets thrashed with sustained heavy load. Additional goodies this round are a 2TB NVMe M.2 drive, a 16TB bulk hard drive, and a 7-port USB 3.0 module to replace the old card reader in the 5¼ bay. I'm keeping the same Corsair Carbide 300R case, but everything is coming out for cleaning if the new hardware can post. I'd set up this booster fan back when I was diagnosing the old PSU going out. It would work fine for a while, and then bye-bye whatever I was working on. One day it failed to make it through boot up before it cut out. I left the fan in after the repair since lower VRM temp certainly can't hurt. Most AIO liquid coolers have the pump in the water block, a design patented by Asus. Pump in radiator is another common layout. In fact, as of recording, Cooler Master is suing Silverstone, Enermax, and AppleTech for patent infringement of its pump and radiator design. It's a bit annoying to see that upper corner of the IHS missing paste here despite following the install procedure at the time. That said, the die sits in the center and I had no thermal issues under load. A hotter chip with more aggressive overclocking might have seen problems. The 300R claimed to support a 240mm radiator up top, but in practice only fans fit there using the provided mounting points. Got around that with twist ties in the prototyping stage, then screws in unofficial locations as seen here. I prefer bench testing to verify new hardware's alive before going to the trouble of installing it in the case. Working the 24-pin ATX and the 8-pin EPS cables out should give enough slack to hook up the new board on the desk while everything else stays in place. That's less work putting it back if I hit a snag that needs parts. I'm confident, but not that confident. This has got to be the fanciest board I've ever dealt with up close, though I know the top end gets way crazier than this. I like how it's packaged with the board in its own tray and accessories in separate compartments. Everything's well protected and easy to handle. Got some Rogue branded stickers and drink coaster too, for my Epic Gamer Mountain Dew. Board advertises out-of-box support for 5000 series CPUs. Nonetheless, double-check the BIOS version as printed on the sticker by the RAM slots and refer to the CPU support page. This board has a BIOS flashback function that should allow updating even with an unsupported CPU installed, but not all boards can do this and flashback doesn't always go smoothly. Checking beforehand can save a lot of troubleshooting headache. AIO will work with both Intel and AMD sockets with some reconfiguring. Refer to the manual as the same model can have different revisions over time. In this instance, Intel platforms use the cooler's supplied backplate, while on AM4 boards like this one, the original backplate stays, but the factory brackets have to go. Cooler includes a standoff kit with insulating washers that take the place of the brackets. Swapping the quick change lock ring converts the pump block for AMD platforms. Always strikes me as funny to see a CPU box without a cooler, where 95% of the package is just empty space. Confirm the pins are clean and undamaged before proceeding. It's a new in-box part with the factory sticker seal intact, but stranger things have happened. Line up the triangles in the corners, and let the CPU's own weight slide it into the socket. It'll only go in smoothly one way and will sit completely flat. I give it a wiggle to confirm it's settled before locking it down. Isopropyl alcohol removes fingerprints along with any residue left over from manufacturing. Likewise, removes old paste from the water block. I went with an X and dot style pattern for the paste, then decided to spread it out to be sure I have complete coverage. It will spread as pressure is applied by the cooler, but I want to avoid the bald spot like seen on the i7. Typically cooler only gets mounted when the motherboard's installed in the case, but I want to see it post on the bench and I don't have a simpler cooler on hand that I can just sit on top of the CPU. Pressing the block down with a slight wiggle settles it on the paste and ensures it's not bound up on the standoffs. Get those thumb screws on before letting go. Torque the screws down in a star pattern for even pressure. I'll go until I feel slight resistance, then move to the next one. Screws on this style of cooler will bottom out when fully tightened, indicated by a sharp rise in resistance. Got the pump and both fans hooked up to their respective headers on the motherboard, though the thermal mass of the loop is plenty for a safe post and some runtime with just the pump spinning. I'm using a stick of known good DDR4 from the first version of Groot, in the B2 slot as instructed. Also brought out the trusty old GTX 960. The 4060 Ti is a much heavier card at more risk when sitting unsupported in a bench test like this. I plugged in power for the GPU before seating it, also to avoid extra pressure on the slot. Using bare minimum of mouse, keyboard, and HDMI out to monitor, Fewer things to go wrong means fewer things to troubleshoot. 3, 2, 1, don't blow up. Fire in the hole. Got some debug activity, got some lights flashing around. Oh, there we go, there's BIOS. Didn't get there in time. Tried to start. So, might be training memory, F2. Alright, there we go. So F1. New hardware looks like it's alive, so onward with the teardown. I'm packaging up the expensive bits for good measure. Keep the original packaging for GPUs in case you ever need to transport a PC. PCIe slots and video cards have an annoying tendency to crack because of how heavy the cards have become. Got cables upon cables in here, made more prominent by past me's mistakes in routing decisions. It's all coming out and getting redone. Yes, I still have an optical drive, and yes, I occasionally use it, just not quite as often as I used to. The 5 1/4 bays have these toolless quick-release mechanisms. Card reader also uses a screw on the backside since it doesn't properly engage and would be noticeably loose otherwise. There's 4 SATA drives in here, filling all of the sleds with this tangle of cables behind. We got the 250 gig old boot SSD, 1 TB current boot SSD, 1 TB old bulk drive, which is now backup, and 2 TB current bulk drive, which is getting rather full. There will be almost enough hardware left over to reconstitute original Groot into a second PC, so I'm being extra careful with it. Watch out for this style of stamped I/O shield, it will slice you if you even think of disrespecting it. Front panel hasn't broken on me yet, despite way more cycles than Crosshair probably expected it to handle. Pulling it off is sketchy nonetheless due to how stiff the clips are. The built-in filter mesh did its job. Even so, these front fans have been in use for years and have a fine layer of powder on the blades. It's impacted but not sticky, and an old toothbrush works great to get in there. Vacuum's a good idea to catch the liberated dust, or do this outside where the dust won't matter. The case overall isn't too trashed, simply in need of deep cleaning after so many hours of use. Vacuum gets anything large and loose, while isopropyl on a paper towel dissolves anything more stubborn. Never use a vacuum directly on the electronics. Dust hitting the tip of the nozzle can build up significant static charge, which can damage the components. The amount of dirt in here was an aesthetics problem rather than a performance problem. I just wanted to get it gone while I had the chance. Integrated I/O shield on the new board is nice, but comes with its own fitment quirks to get everything lined up on the standoffs. Because of the tight quarters up top, cooler should stay attached to the board during installation. I'm well aware this defies a typical order of operations for AIOs. Trust me, I tried it the right way before and regretted it big time. The RAM must go in next. These slots only have latches on the top side, way up behind where the radiator will be. Check the modules are at equal height, and that the latches are all the way engaged, otherwise the modules are not fully seated. I've populated all 4 slots. Refer to the manual for the right configuration if you only have 2 modules. The 8-pin EPS connector for CPU power is really impossible to get to up in the corner once the rad's mounted. In fact, it's tough enough even without the rad in the way. The board has a provision for a supplemental 4-pin connector. The 8-pin is good enough for 300 watts by itself, so I should be in the clear with the 105 watt CPU that might flirt with the upper 100s at peak. CPU fan and pump headers also sit way up here in a line. They're a little bit harder to get to compared to the vertical set on the Z170 board. Here's a closer look at how far over the radiator has to mount compared to the provided mounting holes in order to clear the RAM, VRM heatsinks, and the I/O shield. Luckily, the mesh allows plenty of alternate screw locations. Even so, only 3 of them will fit unless I start drilling more holes. Cable management was something I disliked about the first build, once I learned a little bit more about PC building. This case lacks the advanced cable routing features of newer, bigger models, but I can still do a better job than last time, even with the limited space behind the motherboard tray. Absolutely wild how the 16TB drive has the same outside dimensions and weighs nearly the same as this 1TB unit. I even could have gotten a 22TB version for a couple $100 more. That 1TB hard disk and the 250GB SSD are both getting retired. They still work, so I'm keeping them around, just not for daily use in this rig. Just like the old card reader, the new 7-port USB panel is too short to engage properly with the quick release mechanism, so it also gets a screw in the backside. It's still not secure, so I'll come back to that later. There's only one USB 3.2 Gen 1 header on this board, so I'm hooking up the 7 ports rather than the pair of ports on the case. A hub, expansion card, or adapter off the 3.2 Gen 2 header would be an option in the future. That is, if 7 ports in the front and another 11 in the rear somehow aren't enough, or just because I'd want them all functional on principle. Quite by accident, I got a blacked out color scheme going, so I'm gonna roll with it. Original build was meant to be all go, low show, except for the front LED fans, and those are single color, not even RGB. The GPU's the first piece of RGB hardware I ever bought, followed by this motherboard. Went for a 2TB M.2 drive here. 4TB and even 8TB versions are also available, though the price skyrockets if you're looking at those as of this recording. If the drive comes with a heatsink attached already, use that instead. The tachythermal pad will conduct heat away from the chips and into the heatsink. M.2 drives insert at an angle, then are gently pressed down into place on the standoff. This one is a 2280 module and rests on the heatsink standoff. Shorter 2260 or 2242 drives would need a supplied optional standoff installed in one of these locations with a dedicated screw. Front panel headers are standardized, though I do like the adapters Asus and some other brands use. It's much easier to get things hooked up when you can see what the labels are. Installing a GPU ranks high on the list of things that give me anxiety during a build, and this is a fairly small $400 card, not a $2,000 card the size of a lunchbox. It needs just the right amount of force with a gentle rocking motion, and I'm flinching at every little creak sound. It's such a relief to get the thumb screw tightened so it's not flapping in the wind anymore. The PCIe power cable can tuck around the corner of the GPU, and the slack can live behind the motherboard tray, if there's space. It is getting kinda crowded back there. If you're going to take off the protective films, don't be a dummy like me, and do it before they get trapped. I forgot the outer film on the I/O shield area, and now the pull tab's stuck. A plastic trim tool is a great option for peeling up from the opposite end without scratching the finish. Time to find out if SuperGroot roars to life, or if I did something terribly wrong and the magic smoke leaks out. USB power on the keyboard and standby rainbow RGB instead of fire are both good signs. Now that the basics check out, I'll make a few small changes before shutting down. I've heard about issues with the wireless hardware causing instability on some of these boards, so I'll disable them in BIOS until I know more. Also disabled fast boot after a power failure, and boosted that short delay on the splash screen so I don't miss it next time. Time for Windows on a stick. Highly recommend everybody have a Windows USB on hand, allows fresh install on a new drive, as well as system repair if needed. I disconnected the old boot drive, forcing a boot from the USB, and preventing any chance of accidentally wiping the wrong drive. Not every system will be so accepting, but a USB 3.0 drive sure made the install go faster than USB 2.0 or optical disk. USB 2.0 is a safer choice, and I had one of those as well just in case. I'll skip through the boring setup parts. I'm in, and all systems are go, so time to button it up. Plug the SATA SSD back in so I can access my old files. I'll double check the boot order just to be sure it won't try to boot from there by mistake. These case side panels have me wishing for 6 arms to get all the slots and tabs to behave. It has that vintage sheet metal case charm as I use my shoulder and my head as extra points of contact. USB expansion panel still won't latch because it's much shorter than the optical drive the quick release was meant for. With a full-size drive, these teeth would brace against the drive body towards the rear and keep the latch pins engaged. A tiny bit of cardboard wedged under the lever here keeps it in position. Putting the front panel back is only slightly less sketch than taking it off. Plenty of cases use plastic for removable parts like this that will see many cycles, with predictable results. Did some cable management on the desk to resolve stuff that's been bugging me, and settled on this new orientation for the tower, more access to back I/O, and gives better use of the dresser as additional desk space. 40-second cold boot time? Not bad at all. Groot the first could take twice as long to get going, even before the startup issues arose. Now begins the mountain of work getting set back up. Clean slate install, so gotta get my programs back on there, migrate or recreate settings, and so on and so forth. So, was it worth it? First impressions, this thing is fast, and that's saying a lot since the old rig was no slouch. Even locking to power saver mode retains a snappy UI, with all cores ticking over at just above 1700 MHz. Idle power and temps are higher than the i7 in both performance and power saving modes, yet quite tame given the performance gap between the two CPUs. SoC power includes the I/O die power, and it exceeds core power draw at desktop idle. Power saver further widens this discrepancy. The memory and Infinity Fabric do not downclock with the CPU cores and will run at full speed all the time. Here it's running at the DOCP of 3600. 4 DIMMs are also harder to drive than 2. Like its predecessor, SuperGroot shrugs off whatever is thrown at it without so much as a flinch. It's got thermal headroom if I want to push it harder, and I've not yet gone through tuning the curve optimizer to extract more work with less heat. Put it through Cinebench for comparison purposes. Note that this is 24.0.0, not the more famous R23, which I probably should have used. Nonetheless, pleased to see 53% boost in single-core throughput and a 349% boost in multi-core. Just might do a bit for solving the video editing slowdowns that plagued me before. Interesting to also see a 6.2% bump in the GPU score. Wasn't that much of a bottleneck before, but evidence of one nonetheless. Newer gen PCIe could certainly provide that advantage in keeping the GPU fed, since it only uses 8 lanes and not 16. A more powerful GPU could have seen more dramatic difference between old and new platforms. Take any bottleneck calculator site with a grain of salt. It showed a significant bottleneck with the old platform specs punched in, yet the real-world test reveals a much smaller gap. Also ran Passmark for curiosity's sake, though I did not do so with the old hardware. CPU scored a bit above average in the median, GPU registered slightly weaker. Have not done anything on top of the mild factory overclock. The extra large cooler should help there. Memory exceeded baseline by a fair margin, as did the SSD in all but the random seek test with 4KB block size. Got a long way to go on the setup side, a good chunk of which will be done by the time this video goes live. No upgrade can fix me still being inexperienced with editing, but stable previews at more than potato resolution plus rapid rendering should go a long way for my efficiency. If you enjoyed following along this adventure, consider checking out some of my other stuff. There's a wide variety of content involving electronics, DIY projects, automotive, and more to choose from. Thanks for watching.